we have to constantly remind ourselves, as part of appreciating the reality of the environment, we have to remind ourselves that in this kind of work, it's an extremely competitive space. If I go to a school and I try and I have an agenda that theatre education is actually an education enrichment, I have to accept that that space also has somebody coming to tell them that yoga is good for the kids. Somebody else coming to say, environment education is the most important agenda for your kids. Somebody else, you know what I'm talking about, that if you don't have sports, you don't have good citizens. That space is a highly competitive space. And everybody is right. Nobody is wrong here. So how do I get them to see that theatre studies is important because it bridges right brain and left brain development and all the cognitive sciences have proved this, etc. I'm working in that kind of situation where it's not just clever marketing. It's not just clever marketing. It's a combination of conviction of what's good and creating an appreciation of public good. So, it applies not just to deodorants and detergents, it applies to our kind of work as well. Okay, my topic is this. And I'm hoping to be able to make some links between strategy and this. The attempt will be to see the relevance in arts management. And I do wish to say that this is an area of work which has benefited from a great deal of work which is Indian and very originally Indian. In fact, a lot of the Western literature is looking at our work in India. There are just two main purposes. One is to examine this word institution. There's a lot of popular usage. We talk about the Irani restaurant as an institution. We talk about Koshi's cafe as an institution. We talk about Vikram Bhai as an institution builder, and so on. The word institution is used in with a number of different meanings. But I'd like us, for the purpose of our work in the future, to adopt a somewhat rigorous way of using the word institution, and to look at the management task in institution development. This is an area of work which has benefited from four main streams over about 25 years. I'm not going to elaborate on these, but I am going to very briefly mention the last of the streams. When we started looking at the idea of organizational collectives beyond a single organization, with the conviction that all development work requires collaborative processes across stakeholders, no single organization can deliver development, we realized that there was no literature at all in this field. Management literature ended with the effectiveness of single organization, as Raghu's presentation said. An organization has objectives, it has a mission, finished. What happens to collectives? And yet, all true development work requires collectives, collective effort. So we began by documenting case studies where collectives have actually delivered and have succeeded, and to tease out lessons from them. And out of that came a whole program of work of theory building and methodology. What do you actually do to get people to collaborate? So that was the origin of the work. We say that institutions throughout the history of mankind have emerged and established themselves to work towards normative social behavior. That's what institutions do. There's a normative social behavior in an Irani restaurant. You can say that. So it moves towards normatives and norms. And so it works towards some kind of socialization and internalization of that. This is the right thing to do. It's right to wear handlooms. It's right to consume organically grown produce. When it moves towards normatives, then you've got an institution working. Right? Therefore, based on this, I'm going to share about half a dozen propositions in this quick presentation. And the first proposition is, no organization can succeed without give and take relationships with other organizations. Even in commerce. Even in commerce. You have a goal, this is the desirable end you want to work towards in society, you need others. This is proposition one. As simple as it might appear, it's something we easily forget. Okay? They're all connected to the same goals. Now I want to take you to a couple of examples. But before that, it gives us a rough and ready definition of an institution. An institution is actually an organization of organizations. There's something that holds these organizations together as shared values, shared end goals, etc. And that's an institution. In the commercial field, the Chamber of Commerce is an institution. The members of the Chambers of Commerce are fiercely competitive in the marketplace, but they'll collaborate like hell in lobbying and the government to get a tax concession or to push this or push that. You see what I'm trying to get at? So it is, in that sense, an institution as an organization of organizations. So somewhere we need to ask ourselves, how do we move to that position of being able to effect action in the environment as a collective? Then we're an institution. Okay. Now, here's the first example. It comes from my work in textile policy in this country. Our team in Ahmedabad was, I think Praful Bhai is out. We were responsible for the country's first research-based textile policy. Now, take this case of handlooms. I'm glad that you brought the handloom example. There was a period in which, maybe it was before your time, in the 80s, there were lots of handloom weaver suicides. How many of you remember this? Okay. The government, with good intentions, was pumping money into the weaver cooperatives. It is the bottomless pit. Because handloom weaving is an institution which requires people more than weavers. So they're terribly interconnected. There are cobblers, there are carpenters, there is input trade, there's output trade, there's the beam carriers and so on. It's this together which is weaving. Any amount of support and money put into one element, which is the weaver, doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver. So, this is an institution. You have to strengthen the institution and not the organization of the weaver. Am I making sense? To illustrate? It's no different in the kind of work we are doing now in promoting the theatre arts. The theatre arts is more than the actor. The theatre as an institution thrives when the act of acting is interconnected with half a dozen, at least, other things. Traditions of writing, traditions in the fine arts, traditions in the technology, and the technical equipment, and so on and so forth. And at the center is livelihoods. Okay? If the institution is not vibrant, not working, it's because it's not delivering livelihood. So I'm going from one sponsored project to another. It's not self-sustaining. Every time I have a good idea, I have to go to somebody with a begging bowl and say, please, we want to produce this play. So it's one organization attempting to survive. the institution of theatre has not survived. Okay? So we can take any number of examples. I'm going to stick to just two. So the task is not organizational development. The task is institutional development. If you want the theatre to survive. This is the first proposition. The second proposition is a little difficult for management professionals and behavioral scientists to accept. But if you're honest to yourself and if you're humble, you'll say that the available methodology is very weak. We don't know enough about institutional development. There isn't enough behavioral science here. Okay? We all have pet theories, we all have hunches, but it isn't scientifically grounded as much as you have methodology for low system levels. Proposition 3. The ownership of institutions strongly determines the institution development process. This is extremely important for us to grasp. Why? Because all of us go in there with great intentions, well, good-hearted, with funds, whether it's this Ministry of Culture or Ford Foundation or ActionAid or whoever else, we put in money, we build institutions, which is a misnomer. We can't build institutions. The people who depend on livelihoods, they build institutions. So this is what happens in a typical natural institution which is vibrant and strong. It begins with behaviors. I weave. I make a craft, I make a product. And I do a good job of it. It succeeds. The community adopts it. This is behavior which is successful. And to perpetrate that successful behavior, I create organizations. So there's a second organization, there's a third organization, there's a fourth. Now these organizations get together, confederate, and create an institution. This is the natural sequence of strong, viable institutions. It begins with behaviors which people find successful and purposeful. It serves a purpose, including the crafts. So from the behaviors come small groups, organizations, institutions. They evolve. What we do as management people, as administrators, is to begin with blueprints. We create the institution first. Because we have the money, or we have the means, or we have the political clout, or we have the lobbying. And then we hope for organizational support. And then, it's actually far removed from actual behaviors. That's not what's happening in the field. This is our view sitting in our city offices. That's not what's happening in the field. So this is bound to be frustrating and a failure. Many of our developmental interventions, whether it's in organic farming or rural housing or appropriate technology, follow this model, and we burn our fingers. We don't understand what's happening. Now, the challenge in institutional development is to not fight shy of the fact that we have the power and we have the means and we have the resources, but somehow to find processes which are this way. We bring in our authority and our control and our resources, but generate processes of this kind. They are usually far more effective than the blueprint. This is doomed to failure. Okay? This, for us, in our kind of work in India over many years, has been the most powerful lesson in a search for methodology. How do we actually do development interventions which follows the evolved process? Proposition 4. Creating new organizations does not create institutions. On the contrary, the newly created organization often results in sub-optimization. Now let's take one of the most powerful experiences of the 80s, which is going into rural areas with a methodology that you call community organization, sometimes called self-help groups. It originated in Latin America because of their own ideological context. It worked. It then found its way to many other countries, Africa, South Asia, etc. Now, the community organization approach undoubtedly is successful in creating a strong, small group. You see the effects in leadership, you see the effects in decision making, you see the effects on a number of features, competence building, etc. But it takes about 3 years to 5 years to realize the negative effects of strengthening a group. The very act of strengthening a group retards collaborative process across groups. Till then they were collaborating, now they stop collaborating because they experience the strength of one group. And the development process cannot be underway without the collaboration. Okay? So, beware sub-optimization, that's a systems term, where one unit of an interconnected set gains at the benefit of others. And the totality doesn't achieve what it's capable of achieving. That's sub-optimization. Okay? In an extreme form, if you take the bodily system, if one organ or one tissue grows at the expense of others, we call it cancer. So that's sub-optimization. All right. Why institutional development? Particularly in a developing country like India. Most of us have come from backgrounds where this doesn't need explanation, but it still needs to be flagged. I'm not going to share anything spectacularly new with you, this audience, but it still needs to be flagged. The historical perspective is important because we were a colony for over 300 years. And it's fairly well known what colonization does. The colonization succeeds because it first dismantles existing social institutions. And existing indigenous social institutions are eroded. Okay? So you were talking about water management in the regional area. It served a bloody good purpose because it is highly collaborative. You dismantle that, you bring in an administrative system which serves the purpose of revenue generation. Water management as a system suffers. This applies to practically every aspect of social living. And this is what happens in colonization. Existing indigenous institutions are dismantled and they're replaced by systems which serve the colony or the colonizer. The war is over. We gain independence, and from 57 founding countries, we now have over 200 countries in the United Nations. The newly emerging countries now have a task of institutional development, not organization development. They have to bring back social institutions, which is collectives of organizations, which will serve social purposes. And that does not happen. We try to pursue a development agenda with the institutions left by the colonizers. And that's a mismatch. It cannot work. And many of our frustrations are because of that mismatch. It serves the purpose of the people in power, not the people who need things. So this is, in short, very, very briefly, why we need institutional development. The third bullet point is important. Very important. So that's the last proposition. Now there are two major consequences of this dysfunctional institutional arrangements, particularly in the arts. It applies to many other aspects of rural development as well, but at the moment I'm looking at the arts. Two things happen as a result of this. In this country, certainly, as well as in many other developing countries. I'm familiar with many other parts of South Asia as well as Africa and parts of Latin America. The audience is separated from the artist, and the performance is separated from livelihoods. It's now an artificial existence. The audience is not part of the community. The artist is not part of the community, as it ought to be. Okay? So there is this separation and alienation which has to be addressed. And if we haven't addressed that, we're not doing institutional development. We're going to constantly prop it up with funds and supports and sponsorships. After 50 plus years, UNESCO realized that if you haven't addressed livelihoods, you're going to constantly prop up products of arts and crafts with sponsorships. The project is over, everybody is happy, it's back to where you started. Okay. Networks. I'm going to spend just a little bit more on this concept because networks are one type of interorganizational arrangement. And it probably becomes somewhat crucial for our kind of work. It's not the only interorganizational arrangement. There are several types: partnerships, alliances, federations, etc. But we've done a fair amount of work in not only studying networks, but also in helping build effective networks as part of our consulting work. And of course, what's common to all of these is that they're organizations of organizations. The individual member organizations have their own identities. We're not going to disturb that. But we'll find a way by which they can work together. And therefore, we say that the function of a network is to arrive at rules of the game to manage the similarities over and above the differences. This is the key task in any network. You respect the differences, you actually promote the differences, but find a way by which you manage the similarities. Now, the case studies we developed are all here in this book. I tried to arrange a copy for each one of us, but the message from Sage Publications in Delhi was that it has just gone out of print. I'm still trying to see what we can do about it. Maybe they can recover some from bookshops. But the entire Indian experience of case studies and methodology development and theory building is here. Now we found that successful networks almost invariably perform certain institutional functions, which is in the realm of strategy. And I want to just share what these institutional functions are. So these are performed on behalf of the network, on behalf of the constituent member organizations. This is not a classroom, it's not a seminar, it's not the time for me to elaborate on all of these, but I'm pretty sure you'll grasp what each of these items are. A strong institution tends to perform those functions. It has an information base and ways of exchanging information among the members. It has a very strong information base. It tends to move towards optimization of gains rather than maximization by any one organization. So that what's possible is possible by all. That's called optimization, and moving over to sub-optimization, and so on. I really won't elaborate on these. And for those of you who are interested, I'll be happy to pass on this slideshow. So don't worry about writing. These are extremely important. Now, who will do this? These are done at the level of individual organizations quite effectively because it's really part of strategy management. But who will do this for the collective? So, when the network invests in this, actually has manpower and time and budget for this, the rewards are enormous. Absolutely enormous. So that's why we call these strategic functions. Alright? May I go on? Really doesn't need elaboration, I'm sure. You grasp what I'm trying to get at as institutional functions. It's a key area in institutional development. Find ways to invest in these functions. Okay. This we've already talked about. And each institution will have a mix which is a higher priority for it. For instance, crafts will probably have 4 or 5 out of those 9 institution functions. Handlooms may have some 4 or 5. The performing arts may have some other 4 or 5. It's not that all institutions must do all with the same amount of rigor. There's a kind of prioritization that will take place. Now, the paradoxical question. How do we build a social institution? It's a contradiction in terms. The institution has to build itself. You can play a facilitative role. We can play a catalyst role. We cannot build institutions. It has to be built by the owners of the behaviors. Until we've grasped that, we really don't have institutional development. Defining our role as external interveners. Okay, so what does this mean for development interventions? Methodology development becomes an important agenda in itself because we don't know enough. Right? Whatever we have accomplished so far, we are happy to report. We've created a small international network of OD practitioners and scholars who are interested in complex systems, inter-organization systems, and we are constantly sharing our experiences and research data, but there's a lot more to do in methodology development. This is an important agenda for us. And in the same way, there's a lot more to do about arts management across arts organizations, not for a single organization. Last, the next proposition is that in arts management, the focus is different at least 2 system levels. Capacity building in single organizations and institutional development in the system. The methodology will be different. There's a fair amount already known for the first. We don't have to reinvent wheels. There's a lot of competence in the country in this field of strengthening single organizations. Pooja's work there. Alright? Debbie's work there. A little bit of work that we've done. So this is not such a big challenge. Jay, where's Jay? Jay is going to collect his money. What he's brought back from the Kennedy Center, they're focused on strengthening individual organizations. And there's quite a bit in the country. The challenges are in the second one, because it's really going towards institutional development from organizations. And that's where we need to invest time and effort and commitment to actually develop this field. Okay, that's more or less it. Finally, last bit, I promise this is the last proposition. We need to get on to the group exercise. Really, in a country like ours, the challenges are in managing scale. Yes. Yeah. It's really about scale. It's just the sheer geographical reach, the volume of operations. I mean, to say, look at the example of Sweden is nonsense. You can't replicate that here. With a population the size of Ambawadi and Ahmedabad, what are we talking about? So, really for us, the real challenge is around scale. So, I just want to elaborate on this just a little bit to explain what I mean by challenges of managing scale. It's happening again. It's not moving forward. So when we say that we're a small organization, tomorrow we are becoming multi-project, and we are multi-program, and we are growing. What we do is to invest in many facets of the organization. We invest in staffing, we invest in space and infrastructure, we invest in technology, we move towards a higher order of computerization, and so on. So these are investments in the organization on the assumption that with greater investments in the organization, there'll be greater returns in terms of deliveries. Okay? This is true only up to a point. All the data and analysis from all over show that it's good only up to a point. Beyond a point is cost ineffective. You spend more and more on the organization with less and less returns. It does not deliver. Okay? And this is so in all organizations. In manufacturing, in computer applications, in Mahindra automobiles, anywhere. Alright? So, you reach a point of inflection where you have to rethink how you're going to manage scale. It's not more of the same anymore. So, when you're managing scale, beware the large monolithic organization. Because it will swallow up more and more resources and deliver less. And the government is very fond of creating monolithic organizations. Give all the money to him. Give 100 acres of land, alright? Create this. And they've done their bit. Beware large monolithic organizations. They cannot deliver in scale. Okay? Even in commercial organizations, you outsource. You have alliances, you have partnerships. You work in multiple arrangements. Okay. So, this is what they ask themselves. Must we do everything ourselves? What are the core activities we retain within ourselves? What activities are better done by others? And how do you find an institutional mechanism which holds all of this together? And still work towards the same goals. This is what it's all about. This is really what it's all about. Okay, so I'm more or less done. I'm winding up now. This is the work cited. You may also be interested in a related area of work. We have lots of copies of this. When we did that program introducing arts management for theatre and performing arts organizations, we really got together 17 or 18 organizations, something of a conclave of this kind, except that it was spread over 3 days. 3 days? It was held in Ninasam, in Hegodu, and we really got people to share experiences and what their needs are. What are our needs in arts management for single organizations? Out of that came a very interesting application of this work, which is strengthening boards of non-profit organizations. How do you do management development for boards of non-profits? Ninasam actually had us over to do board level management development. It's a wonderful experience. So this book is available. This is again based on original work in India. It's deliberately put together in a self-study format. All the aspects of management functions at the level of a board are taken through several chapters in a self-study and self-monitoring format. But most important, the reason this book has become extremely popular worldwide is that it has one additional chapter to help trainers do this program with organizations. So it doesn't depend on us. You can pick it up and run a training program in board management back home. We give it away freely to anybody who wants to use this. So this is one important aspect of capacity building in the arts and performing arts sector, which is work at the level of boards. It's the most neglected part of management in non-profits, the board. I'm done. Thanks very much. I'm hoping that this coverage will feed into and help definitely the next exercise, but maybe the next two exercises. Quickly now, before we take a break and start the exercise, any quick comments and questions? Has it helped in connecting his presentation to the subject of, yes?
This is, of course, this is a framework which is based on some generic principles. I am sure that a large number of some special editions were also made in the presentation, which were not part of generic principles of management.
Well, the answer is very simple. They're, in a sense, generic, but they're not armchair speculations. They've come from actual case studies.
That was one observation. Right? Yeah. And then again, what was discussed in some groups, that could they be then applied across?
Into the mic.
Could they then?
No, it's on. You just need to speak into it.
Could they then be applied across the board, like we discussed in a group, to individuals, smaller organizations, larger organizations, or would they again have to be tweaked into groupings?
They will need to be tweaked. They will need to be tweaked. Absolutely. In fact, one of the observations that came out of the last exercise, I was a little surprised that it didn't get highlighted, is that there are arts organizations who are actually practicing good management. They're not in the arts management business. They're not running training programs. They don't intend to run courses. But they're doing good management. And that's why they're successful. So exactly like the case studies here, is it worth investing a little bit in documenting successful arts organizations to see what lessons can be drawn as best practices, as good practices? Yeah. So, I will not be surprised if what you get as findings will not be too different. Because good management cuts across all kinds of non-profits. Okay. Any other? Yeah, he raised his hand first. Can I take his?
When Professor Raghunath was presenting, is one of my, and I have heard from others also saying, management normally divides a line between the managers and the managed. And very often, the managers are very keen to manage, but those who are being managed may or may not be very keen. But then he presented his view. I thought it was a very interesting chart. The organizational performance chart. He spoke about the public value, then who is being satisfied, how are the needs satisfied, etc., etc. Now, my question there has been partly answered, but it has led to another question. The question I wanted to ask you then was, how do we ensure that the needs of those who may be reluctant to be managed, those who are not very keen to be managed, how do we hear their needs? Because, for example, Ashok mentioned about the handloom thing, and someone goes and puts in a machine, a power, and then they say, sorry, we don't need it finally. Now coming back, but I think in a way it gets answered here, because you mentioned that, though there are two different words here, organization and institution. You said we cannot build an institution, it has to be built by the the very primary level is a behavior, then behavior to organization, then to institution. So I assume the voice of those people is heard, or the voice of those people shapes up the organization. So we need not really go into...
Absolutely. It's a question of ownership.
Yes,
it belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the
now coming to this,
institution.
now coming to the whole discussion we are having here regarding arts management related issues, if it is that voice which is going to build up the organization,
Absolutely.
and if that voice is not our voice, and
this is the point.
Pardon?
Exactly the point. Exactly the point.
Yeah, if that voice is not our voice, then what can we do around the whole scenario? I'm not trying to be, I'm not very negative in saying it, please. Don't think I'm negative.
Thousands of people benefit from what the reason why you are all so important, and I really meant it when I was welcoming all of you, that we feel very blessed that you are all coming here. In this society, to have facilitators who are one with the cause is a very, very rare thing. And you all represent authentic facilitators. Very difficult. I mean, you see them, the two of them, all of you. It's very rare to find people like you. And you have such an important role in the society. To just make sure that those voices are not just heard, but everything is aligned to what they think is value, is such a great role. And you are blessed that you are even taking that role. So I don't think there is any relevance in